And we are live. Welcome everyone to our next edition of Static Web Apps Community Stand-Up. So I'm super excited to be here. Today we have a really great agenda for you all. We're going to be covering a couple new product announcements, some upcoming events that we have with Static Web Apps, and then a demo of one of our big new features that we released last week. This is the database connections feature, and we're super excited. I actually have a special guest on, Davide, who's going to be joining us to talk about database connections and the work that we've been doing with the Azure database teams. So off the bat, let's jump into a couple of the new product announcements. We have here sort of our community website that we have at Azure Static Web Apps.dev. And so for the month of March, we actually have a couple fun product news. One that came out after a lot of requests was support for A records. So if you're curious about how you can add A records for custom domains for your static web apps, that shipped last week. And then another big one has been the database connections feature announcement. And actually in this community stand-up, we're actually going to be diving right into demos of database connections and the work that we've been doing with the database teams from Azure. And we're going to be covering as well Data API Builder. A quick shout out as well to all of the resources and all of the community buzz that has happened this past month with Static Web Apps. We had Florian posting about Astro and Azure Static Web Apps. We had Manikandan posting about how to use Azure Static Web Apps to deploy an Angular app, and our good friend John documenting how to use Static Web Apps and Playwright and GitHub Actions for preview environments. So we had a great community buzz this past month, and we look forward to what will come out in April. So without further ado, now that we've highlighted a couple of our announcements and some of the community buzz, we wanted to jump into database connections, which is a big feature that launched last week. And I have invited with us Davide Mauri here. Let me add him to the stream. Hey, Davide, nice to
Hello.
How's it going?
Nice to be here. Good, all good. It's been a nice week, the last one.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for sure. But I'm super glad to have you on today so that we can talk about database connections, the work that we did with the data teams, and then the data API builder. So I have a couple good resources that I have lined up for us. So I want to talk about Static Web Apps database connections, the work that we did with the database teams, and what this data API builder open source project is. So if I go ahead and load up this one. Okay. So with Static Web Apps database connections, we really wanted to make it easier for you to build static web apps using your existing Azure databases. And so what we did is we partnered with Davide and the other Azure database teams to build out an experience that allows you to query your databases through REST or GraphQL protocols in order to retrieve and edit your database contents. So with that, we have a specific endpoint called the /data API endpoint. And here you can make specific post or CRUD requests to the different entities of your database. And this comes packed with a bunch of goodness with features including built-in authorization with Static Web Apps authentication and relationships. Now, all of this would not have been possible without the amazing work that's been happening under the hood from our database peers. And so if I load up this picture, I want to talk about a little bit of how database connections works under the hood and how we worked with the data teams in order to bring this up. So this is actually a demo or a diagram that you built out, right, Davide? And then to show where data API builder fits in the picture. So do you want to sort of explain what this?
Yeah. So I try to capture what is the status of static web apps today, what are the boundaries, and how the database connection sits kind of between static web apps and the database itself, right? So as you probably know, way better than me. Static Web Apps is, and I really love the service. It allows you to have the front end and some API here depicted by Azure Functions together to create a full stack website. Now, typically you have to create or code the Azure Functions to connect to the database or any service, but in our specific case would be the database. And that takes quite a lot of time. And usually if you need to create, the pagination support, the filtering, the sorting and everything, it's quite a lot of work, right? And that's exactly where database connections come in. Because if you only need CRUD support and only in quotes, because even if it's kind of given as a, basic feature, basic functionality, is actually pretty long to code it right? So what you may want to take a look at database connection, because database connection philosophically, I would say, is very similar to an Azure function that you could have written yourself that does everything you ever needed in terms of REST support or GraphQL to access the data in a database. So it allows you to access a table using a REST endpoint or a GraphQL query. For every table exposed, you have support for pagination, for sorting, filtering, selection, and you don't have you don't have to write the code for that. That's the good part, because database connection is actually that engine based on what we in general call data API builder, which took the name database connection in static web apps kind of scope. That basically does that for you. So you just point to a table or a view or a store procedure or a collection if you're using Cosmos DB, and we do the magic. So data API builder does everything for you. Now, the beautiful part of having it integrated with Static Web Apps is that Data API Builder is behind the reverse proxy that Static Web Apps provides. So it gets for free every goodness that Static Web App has, like the emulator when running for authentication, when running locally, and of course all the support to EasyAuth when running on Azure, the ability to manage roles without having to do all what is needed to do to set up a AAD and have the roles there is just super easy. And I think the great thing that we build together is that Data API Builder is so integrated with Static Web Apps that if you really don't want to, learn the Data API Builder, you can just use Static Web App. And now there is the new SWA-DB that allows a developer to simply have one command to do everything, which is amazing, because as a developer, it saves so much time. I don't need to know the details, but if I want to know the details, I can go and learn more and maybe have a better experience, but I don't need to. So I can decide to be super kind of efficient and maybe release something in, 10 minutes or less probably. Or if I want to go into the details, I can spend days understanding how everything works, but that's my choice, which is I think that what I like. We give developer the choice to decide if they want to go deep or just they just to be they just need to build something fast. That's great.
Exactly. So what you're saying essentially is, with static web apps database connections, you can basically just make your queries to the /data API endpoint without knowing everything that's under the hood.
That's
but
right.
You know that you're actually building off of this open source data API builder engine, so that if ever your requirements change, you could go ahead and use this open source runtime with your existing application, your existing configuration file, and then you can essentially move over from one set of resources to the other, right?
Yeah, that's right. Even better, I would say, I can do everything, and that's what I really love, offline. So I can create my entire front end, back end, and database offline. And then to deploy everything on Azure is amazing. It's one line, git push. That's it. Well, of course, you do git commit before and everything, but literally, whenever I want to update something, I can just do git push and it's done. It's a dream coming true in the sense that I think in the last 15 years, everyone had tried to say, okay, the deploy is one line of code. Now we finally are there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought, hey, let's get on this community call together. Let's build a quick demo to show how we can use SWA database connections and show just how productive someone can be building an application with database connections.
Sounds
so we covered a bit of what's under the hood, the data API builder project. But when we're only focusing on static web apps database connections, we can sort of abstract away all of that,
Yeah.
those technical details, right?
That's right.
We basically have to think, okay, we have to bring our existing static web app, we have to bring our existing Azure database, and then somehow we're going to be able to connect them and use our data API endpoint within our static web app to build out some functionality.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So what I have ready for this demo is I have a basic, very basic vanilla JavaScript application, and I want us to go through the steps of connecting a database, both through the local development experience and then deploying it to the portal. And then hopefully by the end of this live demo, everything goes well and we have a great application that we can share with everyone.
Yeah. No, and it's fun. First of all, well, we never tried this before because this is literally live. But second, this is exactly the demo I usually show to see how powerful it is. Because you start from scratch, no framework, no anything that adds complexity. And I'm always a fan to adding complexity later. So let's start. Let's do it.
Absolutely. And I'm starting with the vanilla JavaScript app just to show that this could actually work for any front end that you're using, right?
That's
like
right.
Whether you're writing JavaScript, you're writing React, you're writing Angular, you're writing Vue, any of them, this could actually be super easy to enable. So, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get started on this experience. So I started us off with a couple first steps. The first thing I did is I created a static web app, really just deploying this this HTML page, and then that's my application, right? I already have that deployed. The other thing I did is I created an Azure SQL database, and I haven't configured anything yet, but I went ahead and created it. So I have no tables, I have no configuration of the network and anything. So, and that's basically from the tutorial that we have, the prerequisites, right? So I'm sort of going off of this tutorial that we have in our SWA documentation to show how you can add an Azure SQL database, and I have these two prerequisites. So I know that the first thing that I have to do is configure the database connectivity. So can you share a little bit about how this prerequisite step, why it's needed, and how it's going to enable us to enable database connections?
Yeah, it's needed because on the database side of the world, we really take security seriously. So by default, we protect our data with everything we can, including not allowing anyone to connect to your database unless you explicitly allow the connection, right? So that's why the first thing you have to do is configure the firewall. We understand that exposing a database on the internet is definitely a security challenge. So by default, when you create the database, it's not available to be consumed by anyone, right? So you need to configure the firewall. Now we can take kind of a shortcut here. There is one easy way to say, if I'm connecting from an Azure service like Static Web Apps, and I trust Azure enough, I can just say that my database can be connected or can be queried by any Azure service, because I know that I trust Azure, my database runs in Azure. So as long as the connection is between an Azure service and my database, I can trust it. There are situations where people doesn't even trust this, and they really want to set up, all the private network and everything. That is a possibility also. So I'm just mentioning it here for those who are super into security. But I think we can just go with the public network access and say that we allow Azure services. That will make our life a little bit just easier. And then for those who need more security, it's just about networking at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, I sort of went in, I tried to hide a little bit of my specific IP addresses, but essentially what we need to enable Static Web Apps to access this database is to go ahead and allow Azure Services and Resource to access the server.
Right.
So that's going to allow us to enable database connections on our deployed Static Web Apps.
Yes.
Now, if we want to use this database for local development, we would also need to go and add our client IPv4 address, which is sort of conveniently hidden here. But this is only for local development, right?
That's right. Yeah. And for local development, the other option you have, let's say you really don't want to use Azure until the last minute, right? So you can also use SQL Server. Azure SQL, it's actually SQL Server. It's this, different names, but it's exactly the same engine. So what you could do is download, actually, you don't even have to download right now because we just released something very cool last week. It's called SQL Command, SQL CMD. You just do SQL CMD start, specify the version of SQL Server that you want, and we will download everything for you, run it in a container. So it's in a minute you have the entire database running on your machine in a container.
Wow.
And yeah, that's super neat. So, but anyway, long story short, you can have a SQL Server running locally, deploy everything locally, and then deploy on Azure. Or as you said, you can just do everything on Azure. Just make sure that your machine can connect to SQL Server or Azure SQL in Azure by configuring the firewall rules. Yes.
Gotcha. And I know we've been talking a lot about Azure SQL, but for anybody else on the call, with database connections, you actually have a plethora of choices of which different types of databases you want to connect to.
Yeah.
So Azure SQL is one, but Azure Database for MySQL, Azure Database for PostgreSQL, and Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL are also all options that you can connect your static web apps to. And we actually have more coming down the line. So definitely stay tuned for that. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to this page and I'm going to configure that network so that we're now happy and can start using it locally. So while I do that, let me head back here. So I went ahead and enabled this database to be connected to with my static web apps. And I also added my own IPv4 address so that I can use it for local development. So, okay, once I've done that, I can actually go ahead and get started with my development, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So excellent. So
yeah, you can just get a connection string and have it running locally, or just do it online.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I have my connection string. I put it in a .env file for now, and I want to go back to my database. And I want to show that this is like really an empty database, right? So I'm just gonna log in. I have no tables
there is
here.
nothing.
Okay, so, yeah, perfect. So I'm just gonna start off with a simple stub. Basically, what we have in our tutorial is starting with a basic test person database, and then I'm gonna add a couple entities in here. Add a couple rows to my table. So if I go and refresh it, now I have my person table and I have Sunny and Diraj in here. Okay, great. So I sort of have a simple stub, and now I can actually go ahead and use that within my application.
That's right.
Okay, excellent. So now we get to open VS Code. Perfect. And get started. So this whole experience sort of is enabled by the SWA CLI, right? So can you go a bit into the details of how SWA CLI sort of emulates this database connections feature?
Yeah, so SWA CLI, actually, that's interesting because normally I would have to download the API builder on my machine. It's super easy, just .NET tool install, right? But with SWA, I don't even have to do that, right? Because at the moment I decide to use SWA with Data API Builder, SWA will actually go and fetch the API Builder for me if it's not yet installed. And then I can just do SWA DB in init, for example, initialize the configuration file that is needed for Data API Builder to work. Because I just want to make this super clear. Data API Builder doesn't require your database to have anything special. Like as you just did, you just created a table, and let's say that's the only thing you want to do. You don't want to give a special name to our table, or do anything other than you would normally do to your database to have Data API Builder work. So Data API Builder is completely transparent. Now this comes with I would say a price, in the sense that we still need to have some metadata somewhere, like what table do you want to expose, what kind of security you want to apply to this table. And if we don't ask you to add something special to the database, we need to ask you to put that information in a configuration file. And that's the configuration file you need to initialize right now, which is basically the core of Data API Builder. It's the only thing that is needed by the Data API Builder to work.
Exactly. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to initialize this project to be able to have a database connection. So
Yeah,
to
that's
do
right.
that, I'm going to use the SWA CLI. If you're not familiar with the SWA CLI, we had a great community stand-up last week covering the SWA CLI. But now we've introduced this db init command.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And with this db init command, we can go and create that configuration file that we need to specify, hey, I want to expose this entity and have certain permissions on the different actions. So I'm going to go ahead and initialize it. And actually, I can actually indicate what database type I'm connecting to. So right now it's an Azure SQL database, it's MS SQL. So I'm just going to pass that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it's going to do is it's going to basically start off, it's going to create this folder. I don't know if you noticed, but we just went ahead and created this folder with this configuration file. Okay, so what is this configuration file? What are the different parts of it? I know this is something that's we need in order to know what we're exposing in terms of entities, but can you walk us through this configuration file and what the different parts are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part is the data source, which, as the name implies, is telling Data API Builder to which database he needs to connect to. It needs to connect to. So we are using MS SQL here, means SQL Server Azure SQL, but you can choose, as you mentioned before, Postgres, MySQL, and also Cosmos DB. And then there are other options that are specific for each database. So I will skip over that. And the connection string, of course, it's needed. Now, the important part here is that putting the connection string in a basically text file, a JSON file, is not exactly the best security best practice. So don't do that. You created an env file or you just have an environment variable. You can use @env and specify basically the environment variable you want to use to basically load the connection string from, which is a great way also to kind of abstract also the physical connection string from the file you are using. And then perfect. And then you have the runtime information, which is just something that the Data API Builder needs in order to understand. Do you want to have REST enabled? Do you want to have GraphQL enabled? Do you want to allow introspection for GraphQL? If you are hosting this somewhere, do you want it to work in production mode, which means minimal logging? Or you want to see every single request and generate the query that we generate for you, and then you can switch to development. And then, of course, if you need to call API from another origin, you need to configure CORS. And the authentication is what needs to be configured to let the Data API Builder understand who will be doing the authentication, because Data API Builder doesn't do the authentication at all. It just relies on external authenticator, as it's common today. But using static web apps is just the easiest way to do, overall, because we just then use what static web apps already provide, which is Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, all the goodness that you already put into authentication support. So just leave static web apps and you're golden.
And actually, it has to be said that when you're using static web apps database connections, you need this provider, right? So that's needed. If you wanted to use Data API Builder on your own and self-host it, then you have the option to have different authentication providers. But with static web apps, you get that sort of integration with authentication. Okay, excellent. Give me 1 second. I think there's some noise outside.
Yep. Yeah, no worries.
Sorry
It wasn't too bad. No worries.
Sorry about that. Okay, excellent. And so one thing I know we sort of glossed over, but we had our REST and our GraphQL routes, but these paths are actually configurable.
Oh, that's right.
Like if I wanted to say, hey, I want a different path for REST, or I want a different path for GraphQL, or if I want to disable one or the other, I can actually do that from this configuration file, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that allows me to underline one of the principles we followed and we are still following during development of Data API Builder, which, as you said before, actually happens in the open source. We want the Data API Builder to generate exactly the same API that you would have written by yourself. So we allow basically configuration of everything. Like you don't like the REST path and you want some other name, yeah, go and change it. You only want the REST support and not GraphQL, yeah, do it. So the idea is to be as developer friendly as possible, so that really data API Builder only take away the, let's say, the plumbing work that is needed to connect, to turn a database into an API, but leave everything else to you. Like, so it can be really shaped the way you need it to be compatible with your whatever is your working style. So yeah.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And so while I think these are more of like an initialization configuration, I think most of the time,
Yeah,
when you're configuring things in here is going to be spent in the entities
that's right.
object, right? So
Yeah.
what does the entities object represent? What do we configure in this area?
Yeah, so this is literally where you say what tables or views or stored procedure collection you want to be exposed, and why we need that. Because again, for a security perspective, we do not expose anything unless it's been defined here, because it will be super dangerous if by default we will just allow anyone to access the database, right? So actually you could already run the API builder here, but there will be no endpoint available. So what you have to do is expose your table, the user table that you have created. So typically an entity has a label, a name, that then is also used by GraphQL to create an object, and then the source and the permission. Those are the two minimal things that we ask. So where is
Okay.
the data residing, in which object, and which kind of permission you want to give. This is literally the
So I
minimum
think
one.
Gotcha. So in this case, I would probably have, if I'm following this tutorial over here that we have in our SWA documentation, I would probably have my person entity, and then I would need to have the source of the database, right?
That's
So
right.
I would
Yes.
have my person
Yeah.
entity
And
here.
that section that you're writing right now can be anything. It's just a name, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's why you don't get any IntelliSense. But from now on, you should be able to see exactly that the schema is kicking in, and it says, "Hey, you're missing the source and the permission that are the two absolutely needed options."
Okay. So what you're saying is that this here is sort of going to be the name of my entity. So when I
Yeah,
go on the data API path, then I'm using this name
yes,
as the name of the entity, and then the table name can be anything else, right?
yeah,
I think in this case, it's if we go back to my database,
yeah. It's
let's see, my database.
my test person table. Yeah. So dbo.myperson table. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So then that means that in the source, this is a string, right?
Yeah, it can be an object or a string. If it's just a table, it's a string. If you need to specify, for example, a view, a storage procedure, we require a little bit more information, and that's why it
Okay.
can be either one. But yeah, that's perfect.
Okay,
And
so I
now just,
added my source.
yep.
And then it's still giving me that squiggly line. So I like that
Yeah,
we have the schema there. So the other thing that we need is the permissions.
that's right.
So what is the permissions array? What should it look like? And what does
Yeah,
it
so
contain?
of course there are several options to set the permission, because you may want to set some access for a specific role and some other access for another role. So that's why it's an array. So here, if you open the double quote, you should get some help, and shows like you have. Let's go and. Yeah, perfect. So you have actions and role. Probably, I mean, I like to start with a role. It's the same. Role is basically once you made a request, and you need to be identified as within a role. And there are two system roles that are exactly the same that you already have in Static Web Apps: anonymous and authenticated. Anonymous means we don't know who made the request. It's literally a public request, right? There is no bearer token. There is no XMS client principal.
Right.
There is nothing. We don't know who you are. Authenticated means we know who you are, which means you have been authenticated by someone. Now, if the authentication provider also inject roles that you belong to in after you have authenticated, we can also use those roles. So let's say you are in the role, I don't know, author or manager. Yeah, here the role is just a string. And aside from anonymous and authenticated, that are two system roles, any other role that you may be assigned to by your authentication provider can be used here. And basically what happens is that we do a role matching. Like, so your request is coming in, you have some claims, we take the role from your claims, and then we match it with the permission you're writing. And there is only one role active at any time. So we just get the permission of the role you are using. In this case, I think you can just say anonymous and let's see what happens. It's probably the easiest way to start.
And then
you have to specify the actions, like what this role can do. And we can go easy here and say, typically you would have probably it should help you to see that you have create, update. Yeah, exactly. So these are the typical CRUD requests. If you just want to support everything, yeah, you can use star or read if you only want to get support for reading data, which makes sense for an anonymous table.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I have it set up that we're going to be able to read whether we're even if we're not logged in.
That's right.
The person entity. So I want to go ahead and try this out.
Yeah, that's it. That's all, everything you needed to do. You're done. So it will just run now. Yeah.
So the one thing I have to call out is I did add this environment variable, and I didn't show you, but I added it in this environment .env file. And I didn't show you because it has my credentials and the connection string. But believe me, when I say that I have a .env file that essentially looks like this, and I have my connection string, and then my very secret string that I will not expose on this live. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm not going to save that. I'm going to delete that. But know that it exists in that .env file. Okay. So now I'm ready to go ahead and get my project started. I'm going to do this, use the SWAT CLI, and that's needed because we need the SWAT CLI to use the database connections emulation in order to provide that endpoint. So I'm going to use the SWAT CLI. I'm going to say SWAT start. My application, my HTML files, static assets are in my source folder. And then I'm going to indicate that my data API location is in that SWA DB connections folder. Okay, live demo. Let's try this out. Let's see if this works.
Yeah. So what will happen now is that also data API will, yeah, exactly. You see data API. Something happened. So let's take a look at the error code, which is a good exercise. And yeah, it's probably a little bit on top. Yeah.
Values length for key data source.
Oh, probably in your connection string you have.
Is it too long?
That's the first time I see this error ever in my life. Yeah,
okay,
but it looks like
there's
something with the connection string that the data source it's probably too long, which is interesting.
Okay, let me. I'm going to open my .env in another page. Okay,
that's yeah, that's coming from Microsoft.data.sql client because that's what we are using behind the scene. But that's a good exercise also to show how you can debug this kind of basic errors, I would say, that may definitely happen the first time you use it. And the connection string is the usual Microsoft.data.sql client one, or the one that you use for Postgres or MySQL or Cosmos. So it will be something like source or server equal the name, and then database equals something, and then user ID, and then the password.
You liked a little bit, or I liked a little bit there. Davide, can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can now. Yeah, for a while you were breaking up.
Okay, I'm back. I realized that I have a typo in my connection string. So I was missing, I had a typo in my connection string, but I want to try it again. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, most likely there were some quotes that were not closed. No, yet. Let's see. Yeah, nope, again. Maybe you can just pass the connection string without login and password, so we can take a look. That's weird.
Yeah, I just want to. Oh, okay. Let me. Yeah, I'll remove my password just so we can take a look at it together. Let me open it now. Okay, so this is my connection. I didn't.
Yeah.
So this is what my database I think we have this here. This is the problem.
Oh, that's why. Yes, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
typo.
yeah. That's it.
Yeah, that should definitely not be there.
Yeah.
It's
Now,
while I
now it
was
will work.
trying to hide my .env file. I think I got stumbled in some areas. Okay, so I'm going to.
Yeah. No worries.
I re-added my password, so
Perfect.
I'm not gonna scroll to the right. But yes, okay, let's try
But
again.
now, yeah. I think you can close it now. Now, yeah, it's working. That's
Okay,
perfect.
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so this whole thing was about me having a typo in my connection string. So
Well,
that's
it's,
on my end.
common.
My bad.
That's very
Happens.
common. Yeah.
Okay.
But this is live, right? So this is what happened to developers for real, like every day, right?
For sure. It happens. Okay,
Yeah.
so now I have my JavaScript application. I haven't changed anything to the application. But I should have that data API endpoint available,
right.
right? So if I do a fetch request to / data API, so I'm going to do / data API / REST. Because that's the
because
path that we had
that's what we
configured.
configured in the REST section. And person, I just want to highlight that must be capital P, because that's how you name it the object in the configuration file. Now there is a way to change that, but since we just went plain, we need to use the same name in the URL. So yeah, that should work easily.
Okay, excellent. Let's send this off now. And my promise is loading, and there we go. We have exactly that's exactly what I had in my database. Okay, perfect. So save that typo that I had in my connection string.
Well, it made everything a little bit more spicy,
You're right. We love a little bit of spice on a Thursday. Okay, so I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna close this file. We've confirmed that it can connect to the database. So at this point, we're happy, and we could go ahead and develop it here.
Yeah.
So right now we only have read permission on the person. So that would mean essentially what you're saying is if I wanted to make a post request on this data API endpoint, and then let me pass in a post. So
yeah, you will just get an error saying that you can't because you don't have the permission. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I think it should look something like this.
Yeah, I think you can probably put anything right now because you will not even reach that point, right? Because we immediately notice that you are trying to do something that you can. Yeah, it's forbidden.
Okay, excellent. So I do get a 403. So if I wanted to use this in my applications and my user doesn't have the right permissions, then they get a 403.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And so at this point, what should we do? Should we add everybody to have permissions? Should we add some type of login and then restrict to those logged in users?
That could be an option. Maybe you can say, well, maybe what we can do is maybe start with this and build something just to show that it's very easy to build. And then we can just say, okay, now we want anyone to be authenticated to be able to see whatever we want to show. And then that will be super easy because you just add the support authentication in Static Web Apps, and it's literally one line of code. So,
okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a script tag, and then in my JavaScript, I'm going to be able to define this list function. It's going to make that fetch where we had here, and then I haven't written JavaScript in a bit. I'm just going to have my data, and it's going to be null for now. And then once we do call list, we're going to update data.
Oh, I see.
People. Let's call it people instead. And I'm just going to have that here, and then I'll call it at the bottom.
So that is going to
and then I might as well
a nice table on the console, right? Yeah.
I'm gonna print the data to the console, and I'm also gonna store it in a property
in the people
here.
Variable.
Yeah, and since I didn't change anything to my configuration file, I only changed my index.html. I should be able to refresh my page, get my new index.html, and see this happening. Okay,
nice.
Great. So we logged. So the page refreshed. If you didn't see, and then we logged to the database on line 24, and then on line 25 we logged our people entity. So what is the people and our people variable? Our people variable looks like this. So we could actually go ahead and use that within our HTML now.
Oh yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Maybe
So if I
create a
wanted
list or
to,
something.
yeah. So I could probably even I'm just gonna keep it easy for myself. I'm just going to have a div with an ID and then people, and then I'm just gonna change the contents to the .stringify. Of course, we could
makes sense.
render it in a nicer way, but I'm just gonna do that. So I'm gonna do document.get element by ID.
Oh, it's been a while. I saw someone using document, the raw document, not through some framework. That's cool.
I'm gonna use inner text, and then I'm gonna change it to JSON.stringify people.
Yeah.
Why not? And then if I go and refresh my page, okay, there you go.
Perfect.
So we have it here.
Nice.
This is it displayed in my application. It's not pretty, but at least it shows you that you can go ahead and start using that information after the fact. You can go through it, iterate, and then show better.
And, it's not pretty, but imagine having to do this without data API builder and database connection.
That's true.
It would not be like 1 minute,
everything.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We haven't even shown everything that you get out of the box with the API
exactly.
builder. So actually, I want us to show at least the permissions before.
Yeah. Let's do it. It should be super easy. Just change from anonymous to authenticated.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm actually gonna add a permission, and then I'm going to have authenticated. Have access to access to all CRUD actions. So I mean, essentially, it's the same as spelling out all of the options manually. Right. I'm just gonna keep it at star because it's quicker, and then I'm gonna restart my data API builder, my SWA CLI, so that we get this new configuration file. And in here, I will need to add a link so that I can look. I'm actually going to have href.
The moment I discovered how SWA does authentication, that's the moment I fell in love with SWA. This is so easy.
Oh, yeah. So this is because I know, I'm pretty sure that this is the right path, but with static web apps, you have a really easy authentication, right? Where you basically just add a link. When you click that link, we go ahead and drop whatever cookies are needed. And then at this point, your user is logged in, and you can treat your user as a logged in user.
Yeah.
So just by adding a link like this, I'm going to be able to have that. And then the SWA CLI is going to emulate that locally. So let me go ahead and try this. I now have a login endpoint or login page. I'm going to click it.
Drum rolls.
I don't know. Should I look at my network tab? I still waiting.
Yeah, it should pop up actually open the emulator authentication page.
Oh, I have it. I had it all wrong. It's the auth/login/GitHub.
Oh,
there you go. Okay, that's on me. I just went to our docs to confirm that. Okay, now I have a login link.
Yeah, nice.
Now I get brought to this emulated page. I can specify which roles I want here. My username is going to be Thomas, and then I can log in. And now at this point, SwastiLI went ahead and dropped whatever cookies it needed so that when I do make a post request, we'll be able to have that authenticated role, right? Like we saw
That's right. That's right.
in that page. Okay, so now would be the time of truth. Let me go ahead and try making a post request now that I'm logged in.
You should just add request, API, REST.
Oh, I didn't pass it JSON.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna pass this, and I don't want to make any other mistakes. So I went to go check in the docs. I also am passing these headers. So let's go ahead and send that off.
Nice.
Okay, excellent. Excellent.
Yeah,
so
and the answer is basically what you just created. Yeah, perfect. It worked.
Awesome. So now if I refresh my page, what we're saying is we should now get this new test entity in my data. Excellent. And this is actually in my database.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's done.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, it's super easy to add authorization with your entities and then specify what are the permissions for the entities that you expose. And so I know that we've gotten into a lot of details on just this short amount, but it really goes to show that you're basically adding authorization with the click of a button, right? Like you get all of this out of the box with database connections.
Yeah. And I can stress more than it's super important that everything is working locally. So I can do everything locally, and then when I'm happy, I just do a publish or a push, and then it will be on Azure or internet, and it's done. And that's
absolutely
the whole difference. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, let's say we've built this application to what we're happy with. It could
going to be
be a bit more fleshed out, but now that I'm happy with this, I can go ahead and just my computer wants to cooperate. Okay, so I added a couple things. I added some scripts. Okay, so okay, I'm gonna add this. I'm gonna add all of them except my .env. So let me go ahead and
exactly
add this. Because I wouldn't want to have my .environment variables in my GitHub. I'm just gonna add everything now.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the git push I was referring to at the beginning. That's the only thing you need. Oh,
yeah,
beautiful.
Excellent. Okay, so now I'm just gonna pull up my repository. Okay, we don't need all of this. We just need this one, which I just updated. We can see that just now it updated. We have my SWA-DB connections folder here, my source folder, and everything I just pushed. So here's one aspect of it. It's that now it's going to go ahead and build. And with this, what we have is we specified, hey, my source folder has my HTML files. And when you build with for static web apps, we're actually going to know, or we're going to have this convention that your folder that contains your configuration file is called the SWA-DB connections folder, and that's at the root of your repository. Now, of course, you could go ahead and configure that to another area if you wanted to, but this is just really a quick getting started experience. And if you don't want to have any additional configuration, this is sort of the convention. And then here we have that configuration file. And so while that builds, I can show how we can go ahead and enable this on our static web apps through the portal or through ARM. Okay, so what we've added is we've added this tab for database connection. And what we have is, on a per environment basis, the ability to add a database connection. So let me just go ahead and refresh my page. Okay, so right now I only have the production environment, and here I want to link my database. So then I can just click here. I'm going to choose, it was an Azure SQL database. I'm going to choose my resource group, which is swadab demo. My resource name, which is swadab demo as well, which is the resource name of my database. And then I have this database name, and I'm just going to use connection string. And then here I'm going to add my username and password. Okay. And then here I get a quick information. I have to say that I've configured my network, which is what I did, and my database connection configuration is added to my repository. And that's also the case. So at this point, I can go ahead and link my database. Okay, so right now I'm getting missing configuration file, but I think that that's because my GitHub Actions haven't finished building.
Yeah,
so let me bring back up my GitHub. Okay, we just finished building. Everything's happy here. Okay, perfect. We don't have a warning anymore. We see that we're connecting to swadab demo, and we can even confirm from this information here that this is the configuration file. So if ever we wanted to debug and see which configuration file we have, it's in here. Okay, so that means that if I go back to my vanilla JavaScript application, the one that's deployed, and then I refresh my page, I have my login button, I have my network tab going where we fetched the person. Excellent. And then we're logging them all here. Then I can, so it's working, essentially. What we're saying is that we're retrieving this from our database. It's the same as what we had locally because we're using the same database.
That's right.
And then if I wanted to log in, I could go ahead and do so.
And now you are doing with the real thing, with the real GitHub.
I'm in the actual static web app. I actually used my own authentication. It just so happens that I'm already logged in with GitHub. And then if I wanted to, I could make a post request, change this one to Davide, and then
here I am.
There we go. And then essentially we refresh the page again, and then we can see that that's actually been pushed into our database and propagated there. Okay, awesome. This went really well.
Job is done. We can go and celebrate.
Yeah. So, of course, this application it's a bit bare bones. So what we did is we built a couple really compelling samples. So that's one of the links I wanted to share with you all today. aka.ms/swa/db/samples. So in this repository, we went ahead and we have a couple samples of what you can build with Static Web Apps database connections. So we have a to-do app, a library content management app, and then a tour of wonders app. We have so many samples with a bunch of different frameworks. One of the ones that I personally worked a lot on is this one using React and database connections. And I think you've probably seen it in a couple other demos, but has a very aesthetically pleasing. It's Bootstrap, but it's nicer than whatever HTML we built together.
Yeah, definitely.
But we do have that login, and we even go into the details of what you can do with GraphQL, because we only used REST here, but we didn't mention that at the same time there was a whole GraphQL endpoint that we could have used. We could have specified, hey, we want certain properties, or we want certain relationships.
That's
so if you wanted to go into the details, I think the samples is really a good source for that. And actually, while I'm on this topic, I want to share a couple other really helpful links to get started with Static Web Apps database connections. So the first one, of course, docs. It's always the best place to get started
absolutely.
when you're learning a new feature. So we have this short link. It's also accessible on our documentation site. So let me just pull that up. This is when you're going to the Static Web Apps documentation. You can find information on database connections.
Mhm.
And if you go into the tutorials, you can even see a couple tutorials for the different database types that we support. We also had the announcement on the tech community. So that's here. And I think that's a really good place if you want to have a bit more context. It also features the 2 videos that we filmed as part of the Azure Tips and Tricks experience, where we really dive into these full scoped applications. Those are the 2 videos that Craig and I prepared for. We have the Getting Started, which is that Azure SQL, and then the samples, which I showed as well. So those are a couple really helpful links if you want to get started with database connections. And throughout all of this, we have had this ongoing effort to really show you how to use it with all the different possible frameworks that you could use. So all the JavaScript and the Blazor framework, if that's what you're using, Blazor WASM, we've been collaborating with the cloud advocates to put out some great content. So we have a collection here where we're featuring a lot of different articles that were put out. Aaron put out this Blazor, SWA, and GraphQL. Nice. We had those Vue, React, Angular samples that we talked about. We have more coming with Svelte and Cosmos DB, some best practices. So yeah, I would say if you're looking for any content, I don't think you'll have any shortage of it for database connections. We're really trying to make it as easy for you to get started with this and start leveraging this within your own applications, just because of the productivity gain. Okay, and that brings us to the bottom of our agenda. It's the top of the hour, so it's time for us to close off. I want to call out one last thing: is we have a couple upcoming events, which is really exciting. Hey, this is the community stand-up. Thank you all for joining. We have community stand-ups every 4th Thursday of the month. So this was March edition. Stay tuned for April edition. We have the Student Summit, .NET Day, VS Code Day, and Build that was announced May 23rd to 24th. So we'll be there as well. So we're looking forward to seeing you all. And yeah, Davide, this was great. Thank you so much for joining.
That was cool.
I had a blast.
Thanks for having me. I'm super happy that this is going to make developer life better. I think it's just easier to build stuff now.
Oh, definitely. And you have all the best practices out of the box, query optimized, and it's like it really makes it so much easier to build those applications with that have database content.
So looking forward to feedback that anyone may have. Just send it our way.
Actually, I wanted to feature this. We're collecting feedback right now in the Azure Static Web Apps GitHub. So I would be remiss if I didn't shout this out. Thanks for the reminder, Davide.
Sure.
But here we have an ongoing discussion for database connections. We want to see any feedback that you have, any comments that you have. So we have this for database connections. And we're really looking forward to seeing what you build out with database connections.
Super cool.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Oh, this was great. Thank you so much, Davide. I had a blast. Thanks everyone for joining. And we'll see you in the next one.